Thank you, Sean. Thanks everyone for joining. And Mudit, what an absolute pleasure to be doing this webinar together. I really appreciate your time. For some background information, Mudit and I met 25, 30 years ago in a cardiac electrophysiology development program. We've both stayed in MedTech, but our careers have taken different paths. And so we're going to talk about what that looks like today. But as far as for those of you who are new to investing in MedTech, what we'd like you to walk away with is a real world understanding of this market, the different types of devices, the risk levels, whether you're investing in 10 million or less, which tend to be the devices I work on, or hundreds of millions, which tends to be the devices Mudit works on. We want you to feel more confident in the investment that you think you may make in this space. So with that being said, briefly, my background, I'm with leanRAQA. leanRAQA does medical device for the most part, regulatory and quality consulting. I'm the oddball. I'm the general manager that oversees operations, but I also do commercialization and product development consulting and executive leadership consulting in this space. So over the course of over 30 years, I've helped bring over 200 different medical devices to market, most of them much less of a risk class than what Mudit has worked on. And so with that being said, Mudit, I'm going to turn this over to you to introduce yourself and go through your slides.
Thanks, Renae. What a pleasure to be here. And for that, look forward to the session, and good morning, everyone. I have half an hour, so I'll keep it relatively high level, but please feel free to ask questions as any specific questions that you may have. So Renae, if you can go to the next slide. I'm an electrical engineer by training, grew up in India, and after my undergrad, was very fortunate to get a scholarship to come and get my PhD at Duke in biomedical engineering. Then worked with a couple of startups in Silicon Valley, and then moved to Guidance, which was the second largest pacemaker company. And that's where Renae and I actually met almost, as Renae pointed out, 25 to 30 years ago. Decided to switch gears after product development experience and went to business school, from where I went and joined J&J's venture fund, and left that venture fund in 2007 to start my own fund called Synergy Life Science Partners in Silicon Valley. We had 4 unicorns come out of it, a company called Inspire, which is in the sleep apnea space, a company called iRhythm in cardiac rhythm management space, Aptus and Transenterix, which was a surgical robotic. 2019, I started Treo Ventures along with NewXL, which is a virtual accelerator of sorts to focus on neuromodulation. So besides being a venture investor, I'm also an entrepreneur and have started 4 companies over the last 5 years and have now raised close to $175 million in venture financings for those companies. So I bring a little bit of mix of founder, entrepreneur, and an investor mindset to this panel. If you go to the next slide. So this is perhaps a little bit of extension of my background, showing where we invest. We truly play at the intersection, and when I say we, I'm talking about Treo Ventures, the venture fund that I founded. We truly invest at the intersection of biology, what I call deep tech. A big portion, I would say 80% of our portfolio is focused on leveraging high-tech, deep tech technologies for medical devices. And obviously, all this has to make sense in the context of health economics, considering the environment we are in. So when we think about the biology side, we are focused on big therapeutic areas like cardio. Neuro includes multiple therapeutic areas. As you can imagine, brain and the nervous system controls pretty much all the major organs and the functions in the body. Orthopedics, inflammatory disease, name a big disease area, and we have probably invested in that. On the technology side, when I'm talking about deep tech, we are talking about devices which have their own chips, sensors, batteries, power management, communication systems, algorithms, and so forth. So actually, AI is sort of embedded in these devices. And as I mentioned, healthcare economics obviously has to be a critical part of what we invest and has to make sense. If you go to the next slide. So what do we look for? I think one of the things, if I can walk you through what MedTech investing truly is, it's really about needling your way through a complex web of risks that we believe will yield appropriate risk commensurate rewards. So we as venture capitalists are ultimately measured and rewarded for returns we generate for our investors. This is a high-level list of what are the things we focus on during our diligence. It's a laundry list, but it's a fairly nuanced because it's more of an art than science. And you really have to work your way through assessing risk for all of these elements that are associated with medical device development and commercialization. You'll hear me say two words very often: time and money. Those are the two things that everything listed here ultimately has to translate to, and that's how we assess an opportunity. So what are we looking for? Big unmet clinical needs, or in other words, big markets. We focus on markets that present an opportunity of $1 billion or more annually. So we are really looking for big unmet clinical needs. The other element that we'll really focus on is the team. We are looking for stage-appropriate domain experience teams. For example, if we are developing an implantable device, I would prefer to see an R&D leader in the early stages of the company who has actually taken multiple implantable devices through product development and FDA approvals. If it's a commercial or clinical stage company, then we will be actually transitioning over to different kind of leader. So stage appropriate and domain experience are the two key words when we are looking at the team that is going to be working on these products for either development or commercialization. Third element, and this is obviously the product and the technology, has to be highly differentiated, provide distinct advantages over an existing solution, or if it's a new market, then it has to be a very easy to use device, relatively speaking, in the hands of a physician. We spend a lot of time on trying to understand what is the physician incentive and how do they line up with the specific solution or the device that we are looking at, and how medicine is practiced overall. It's very difficult to change the practice of medicine, so ideally we would like things to fit in the current workflow. Payer dynamics is extremely important. On the regulatory side, we want to get a really good estimate of what a clinical trial would look like to get this product through FDA approval. How many patients, how long a follow-up, ease of recruiting the patients. This, again, all of this translates to time and money. And the clinical trials in our situation for class 3 devices is probably one of the most expensive phases of the medical device investment besides commercialization. So again, this is an area we spend a lot of time understanding what will it take to convince FDA to approve this product.
And Mudit, before I go to the next slide, if I could just comment, with the lesser risk classifications, we look for all of these things as well. Some of them will be very different, and I will talk about that later in the presentation. I know we only have 30 minutes with Mudit, so.
Sure, that makes sense. And as I emphasized, this is for class 3 devices, what I'm talking.
Yeah.
Reimbursement, while we don't have this fully sorted out in early stages, we do want to see a roadmap as to how we will ultimately get paid for these devices. And I would say this is becoming a bigger part of diligence early on. And then in the end, it's all about the exit potential and the time to get there. It's all about how much dollars for all these activities that I talked about: product development, clinical trial, reimbursement, and so forth. How much money will it take and what time? And what are the comps that we see in that specific therapeutic area to really understand, is this investment worth our while to get the appropriate returns? If we go to the next slide. As I mentioned, it all comes down to time and money for investors, which I'm sure you all can appreciate. We are constantly weighing an opportunity from its upside versus how much time and money will it take to risk retire a company and exit it via an IPO or M&A. Again, I can't emphasize enough that, when you think about product development, clinical trials, regulatory approvals, reimbursement, etc., everything has to be synthesized down to ultimately how much time and how much money will it take and what's the potential exit. So on a risk adjusted basis, you have to generate attractive returns to compensate for a relatively illiquid asset class here. Different funds have different tolerance for different kinds of risk, but you will see them weighing most of these risks in some shape or form. If you go to the next slide. So this is now I'm going to take a little bit of how the investors or the VCs look at risk and how entrepreneurs see it. And there's a little bit of difference in how especially early stage entrepreneurs see the risk versus an investor does. Entrepreneurs tend to see it as more linear and limited up to clinical trial stage. Again, I'm talking specifically for class 3. VCs, on the other hand, see risks compounding and layering on top of each other. So that's why you see a big divergence in how people perceive this risk, and as a result, what they would see as a appropriate reward to be had for that. A lot of things have to go right over a long period of time for a company to be successful, and that's how VCs look at it. So it's really important to understand where the investors are coming from. They have several opportunities. We see a lot of opportunities, and we tend to gravitate to ones where we see either lower risk for same reward, or where we will see disproportionately high risk for a relatively high reward for a high risk opportunity. Once you understand this mindset from an investor perspective, your business plan, your thought process tends to evolve, and you connect a lot better with potential investors or the venture capitalists, and really gives VCs more confidence that you have a good grasp of the underlying risk. This is, again, part of our assessment of the team. How well does the team that we are investing in really understands this risk as a plan to tackle these risks in a timely manner? If you go to the next slide.
Before I do, I did want to comment that this curve that we see here, that Mudit's put on this graph, also actually applies across all devices. And Michelle and I, the founder and principal at leanRAQA, I talked to new investors and or people who are new to MedTech about the fact that once you get your, for example, regulatory approval with the devices we work with, not a lot of our devices have to go through clinicals. Most people think that's the end of the race and it's just going to be smooth sailing from there. And that is not the case. That is just the beginning. It's the commercialization piece that is the highest risk and takes the most amount of money and work. And later on in the presentation, I will take you through commercialization journeys based on the type of device and how it addresses the market and how to level set your expectations around timing for the type of device you may be investing in.
So, as I said, risk is an eye of the beholder, but so is the valuation. And just like you would compare your home value to a similar home in a similar neighborhood, be sure you do really good research on appropriate comps. And the keyword is appropriate, implying similar stage, similar market focus, similar therapeutic areas, similar class of devices, and so forth. When you're raising money, and this is, again, one thing we see with a lot of entrepreneurs and early stage investors, angel investors, that effectively when you're raising money, you are selling a portion of the company and some control to the other investors. This implies dilution in your ownership and also control. Unfortunately, it's a fact of life. And again, I am an investor and I'm also a founder. So I feel the pain on the founder side when I have to raise venture money, but that's just the fact of life. I do find that founders often hesitate to raise adequate capital and or seek unrealistic valuation and will hold off financing. Say, hey, I'll come back later when I think I'll get better valuation. I would have accomplished more milestones. The reality is, depending on the class of devices, you're most likely going to need investor capital. And so there's just no way around it. And in the end, a X percentage of something is more valuable than 100% of nothing. So let's keep that in mind as you think about valuations and keeping that somewhat realistic. If we go to the next slide. So this is just a concluding slide. We are part of a highly interdependent ecosystem where we work very closely with each other. The ideas, the entrepreneur, the capital, academia, and the research, big companies from an exit perspective, we all need to work together. And just like any other industry, there's good players and bad players. There's a lot of, so there's a mixed lot out there. There'll be good VCs, there'll be not so good VCs. And it's equally important as you are looking to, as if you're an entrepreneur, you're trying to work with VCs, to do your diligence on that particular venture fund and make sure that that's the type of people you can work with, because it's going to be a long journey so you better partner with good people. So that's kind of my portion of the presentation, and I'll take any questions. We have a few minutes here, Renae.
Yeah, yep. So you have about 12 minutes till you have to leave. Any questions for Mudit before we move on?
Let's see some questions here.
Yeah, there are a number of questions in the Q&A. I can read them. The first one is, Mudit, how do you think about high-risk device that still needs a few rounds of animal studies and product development before those pivotal studies can be done? If the box is Ray, financial potential is checked, would this be in your scope?
Yeah, I mean, from the accelerator, we actually start companies where we basically have some very strong proof of concept in preclinical work. We typically like to see at least that as a bare minimum, but then also want to see some literature around the basis of that mechanism. So we have done companies where there's very strong literature that says that if you do X, Y, Z, it'll lead to this outcome. Then we like to see some preclinical work around it. And that is good enough basis for us, if it's an attractive opportunity, obviously, to invest in those. So the answer is yes, that would be within our scope. But again, it all depends on how I perceive the risk that it has been answered and how somebody on the other side of the table will perceive the risk. Hopefully that answers the question.
I think so. There's another question. With exits being scarce over the last couple of years and portfolio companies lingering, how does your risk tolerance evolve? Do you have any build to buy appetites? I'm not sure.
Yeah, so no, that's a great question. I mean, definitely the exits have gone slower. One of the things that, at least with how we look at investments, we don't, as much as we focus on what the potential exit is to understand what's the upside with a particular opportunity, we actually don't plan for an exit, because you can never plan for an exit. So when we invest in a company, we take the mindset that we have to invest all the way to cash flow break even. It could be cash flow break even being a private company. So we've actually built in multiple rounds of financings. So that's kind of one way where we go, hey, if we can't exit at a certain time frame, we will have accomplished enough value inflecting milestones to keep attracting additional capital. Build to buys, that's definitely something that few strategics have done. Not every strategic does that. So it just depends on the therapeutic area, on the specific type of device, and the strategics in that therapeutic area. So you do see quite a few of those. We are always open. As an entrepreneur, for my companies that I co-found, I'm always open to looking at build to buy, because that's a little bit less dilution to me. It caps my upside, but it also provides relatively lower dilution with a potential to exit.
Next question is, what timeline do VCs typically operate and expect returns over?
Yeah, so, I'm a stage agnostic VC. I invest very early stage, and I've done crossover rounds. So for different funds have different philosophies about it. We take a portfolio approach that we need to have some late stage companies that we can exit in the 3 to 4 year time frame. And then bulk of our companies will be probably 7 to 8 years because we are doing class 3 devices. There'll be funds which do only late stage post-approval. So they are looking 3 to 4 year exit time frame. So it just depends on the specific fund that you're talking to, but it's a spectrum. I would say most class 3 medical devices from start to finish, you're talking about 7 to 10 years.
Thank you. Coming to the team, what are the potential critical aspects we should be aware of beyond expertise? What is the role of the cap table distribution and how much should we weigh this in?
So, the team, I think, again, integrity, transparency, the kind of people you want to work with. That is the softer side of the team. How well they communicate, all those things matter. But at the end of the day, this is a pretty complex space. You have to weave your way through a lot of complexity in product development, regulatory, reimbursement, and so forth. So domain experience to us is very, very important. I'm not going to take a technology entrepreneur and put him in charge of a class 3 medical device product development. It's just a very different mindset. It's just very different environment that they have to work in. Cap table distribution, I'm not sure I understand the question. So
Okay.
I think I might, Mudit. A lot of times, especially with the class 1, class 2 medical devices, the lower risk, you have big cap tables because people have went to friends and family for money, angel investors. A lot of times the people who found the company are a clinician or an engineer or a combination of both. And so they have excellent understanding of the market need and the technology, but not always the ability to commercialize. It's a different skill set. And you mentioned that before. So therefore they do lots of rounds of funding, even before Series A. And so their cap tables are huge.
Yeah. So we are pretty averse to very large cap tables because whenever we come in, if there's a long list of individual investors, we will actually, before we invest, we will form an LLC where we'll pick one member to represent all those investors in the company, and that becomes one line item. Because it becomes very difficult for the management to be chasing 100 people, 150 people to get things approved and so forth. So as a rule, if there's a lot of individuals on the cap table, before we invest, we will make sure that that all gets simplified. Your ownership remains the same, whatever it is, the economics don't change, but we don't want to be chasing 100 people for approvals and things like that, signatures. So we want to see one LLC being established and all of those individual investors getting to like one person who can represent that LLC.
Thank you. What risks do you see for FDA versus CE mark approval for FDA class 3 devices?
Yeah, it used to be CE mark was all about proving the safety and establishing that the device is doing what's intended to do. So if you have a device that is supposed to stimulate the heart, whether it's effective to actually treat something, CE mark didn't care about that. All it cared was, is it safe? And can you show that you're actually stimulating the heart? So it was a lot lower hurdle, but with the MDR coming in, there's a lot of uncertainty around class 3 devices in the European marketplace with the CE mark. So we actually have stopped. We used to go and get the CE mark on way to FDA approval. None of our companies now pursue CE mark because there's no value in it. It has the same regulatory hurdles as FDA or more because it's a little bit uncertain what they're looking for. And on top of it, Europe is not a homogeneous market. So Germany is very different than Switzerland, which is very different than UK. And these markets are not worth. US is still the dominant market for class 3 devices. So we actually just have stopped doing CE marks for our class 3 companies.
And that actually holds true for class 1 and class 2 devices too. And these lower rounds of investment, folks that are experienced just across this industry now, say US first. And if you see a company that says, we're going to Europe first, there's red flags there because of all the reasons that Mudit just listed.
Mm. Where would companies such as recently acquired Shockwave or next generation technology histosonics map to your screening process?
Yeah. So, if you look at both these companies, I mean, Histosonics, I won't do it. It's a great company, and I have very good friends who are investors in it, and I've looked at it. It was a capital equipment-based company. I just don't do capital equipment. So I'm very clear about our criteria of investing. I can't chase every opportunity. So I tend to focus on mostly implantables. Histosonics, again, a great outcome for investors. A lot of my friends were investors in there. Shockwave, we looked at that. I've ended up investing in Inspire. So again, move to an implantable rather than a capital equipment with catheter. So it just, I'm going to miss some opportunities. I'm going to hit some opportunities. Just the nature of the way this industry works. iRhythm was a disposable device. It's around a $6 billion company now. So you lose some, you win some. So these would be high on my list of companies to keep an eye on, but I did not end up investing because of the capital equipment.
To add to that too, Mudit, I mean, you are very clear about what you do invest in, and you go narrow and deep into those channels. And it's my understanding that, for example, you know the risks, and you like to have control over the whole process from product development to regulatory to quality to manufacturing. So none of that's outsourced. You actually fund all of that and keep it in-house. Is that correct?
Yeah, we keep it in-house, but we do work with, consultants because we don't have always, we want to keep the teams lean. So I have one company, which is a class 3 implantable company. They are going through pivotal trial. The total team size is 26 people. So it's fairly lean for conducting a trial that is close to 150 patients. And this includes R&D and the clinical team. So we, for our regulatory, we have internal expertise, but we always like to get some external sort of sounding boards. So we work with regulatory consultants in DC who have a lot of experience with class 3 implantable. So we do work with consultants, but it's on ad hoc basis. But in general, we control all the major functions internally, and we have people inside who are responsible for those.
I know we're pushing on your deadline.
We have 3 questions in only a minute, so I'm going to pick one. In case of successful clinical cases, just a few, of an implantable medical device bone scaffolds, what is the valuation? Impossible to say.
Yeah. So, it's tough for me to answer that with a specific valuation, but I would go and look at what were the other bone scaffold devices or orthopedic devices that have been funded over the last 5-6 years. Look at the Series A financings and so forth. Try to get a sense where they were. But I can tell you, if you are the range I can give you, this will be somewhere between $15 to $20 million pre-money valuation at most. It all comes down to how much more money has to be raised, because bone scaffolds can take a long time. FDA wants long follow-ups, 2 years and beyond, big trials. So there's a lot of money that has to be allocated towards that. And then people want to make multiples on that. So you work your way back from that exit potential of, let's say, $300, $400 million, and work your way back to figure out, if you're coming in as an investor, you want 5x on it, what would that valuation be? But roughly, I would say somewhere between 15 to 25 million.
Well, I encourage everybody to submit more questions. Even though he will not be here to answer them, we will try to get back to you with some kind of answer, and appreciate you joining us today. I'm going to go ahead and launch the poll question, if I can figure out how to do that. Polls and quiz.
And while he's doing that, I just want to say thank you very much, Mudit. Really
Pleasure.
appreciate your time, your expertise.
My pleasure. Glad we could do this. Thank you.
Yeah.
Bye-bye.
All right. Take care.
Take care. Please take a moment to complete the poll questions that you see on the screen. Wow, that was wonderful, Renae. Thank you for inviting him. And, I think that we'll get a chance to answer some of the remaining questions, maybe. Um,
Yeah, I think so. So what I'm going to do in the remaining part of the webinar today, and we can open this up, of course, to questions too, is to talk you through much of where Mudit was giving examples of things like making sure technology fits into a clinical workflow, that the clinicians have the right skill sets. Those all translate across all medical devices, regardless. So I'm going to talk you through some examples in those areas, as well as regulatory quality and others. And I feel comfortable answering questions with less risk of classification of devices and investment. But I think that if you do have additional questions for Mudit, we can get those over to him. So moving on in the presentation, Mudit touched on this and its market size. So he focuses higher risk, higher reward. So it takes a lot more time, money, and expertise to get those implantable class 3s to market. At Lean, we focus on the devices are just as important in many ways, but they're lower risk. There's a lower threshold for investment. There's a lower threshold for clearance with the FDA. And so you have lower reward. He has companies that have billion-dollar, revenue. Most of the companies we work with are tens to hundreds of millions of dollars in revenue. So there's a big difference there. When it comes to validating an idea, though, we all go through the same process. Is it cheaper, faster, easier? These are very basic but important questions to ask. How do you know if an idea is worth investing in? And then upfront tease out if it's just an idea or a viable product. So Mudit pretty much has a blueprint for that as he works through these implantable class 3s. And we do too, in terms of if you're new to investing in MedTech, we can help guide you through answering these questions. Do the end users really need it? This kind of fits into the clinical workflow. Is it appropriate for the target market? We have some examples of technologies in this area. Can it be made? Can the end users use it? That very much is about skill set, and we'll talk about products in that area. And is it at the right price point? Because at the end of the day, you could have a fantastic device that, let's say, you've designed and have to sell it for $20,000 a pop, yet the market will only bear 10. And that unfortunately happens. So you need to plan for pricing. And if you're an investor in this space, really pressure test the cost and the pricing assumptions as you're going into making an investment. So here's an example of, is this the right target market? Worked on a product. It was developed in Europe. It was a mobile app that could scan the skin and tell you if you should go see the dermatologist or not. In Europe, at least in certain countries, that's important because the wait time to see a dermatologist can be up to a year. So this helps triage and perhaps bring you in faster. Here in the US, when we tested this with dermatologists specifically, they asked, hey, can we use this app instead of doing a biopsy? Absolutely not. So there was going to be trouble penetrating the US market because dermatologists are widely available. It's easy to get in to see one. And you weren't going to receive reimbursement for this device because it's not a true diagnostic. It's just, it would almost be a wellness screening tool. So we were able to help this company say, no, don't waste your time. Don't spend your money here. There's not a need in this market for it. So as far as skill set, this is a big one. The first product I'm going to give you an example of was a treatment for acute wet macular degeneration, where they put radioactive seeds behind the eye to treat the blood vessels that are basically overgrowing. They did their clinicals in Europe, where they use a very different technique. Clinicians are trained there to do a subtenons anesthesia technique. So they did all their clinicals there, but their target market was the US. Clinicians here did a different procedure. It's called retrobulbar block. So the problem was the fitting into the clinical workflow just wasn't going to happen in the model that they had. Same with this minimally invasive cardiac ablation system. So this is an interesting one. Mudit and I both had connections with this company, and Michelle too, for those of you who know Michelle at Lean. So it was a great minimally invasive cardiac ablation device, but the technique, the skill set needed was more for an electrophysiologist who works remotely inside of the heart rather than a general surgeon. So they were targeting this device at general surgeons who are used to cracking the chest open and cutting the heart. So this technology, though it was excellent, did not make it because of that. It had the wrong skill set, and they raised, I think, close to $70 million. So really important to understand the skill set of who's ever going to use your device. Manufacturing. You need to be thinking about this as well and probing on this if you're investing in a new MedTech company. Is it possible to make, and can you scale it? So I'm going to give you an example of a device that used radioactive material. So they used radioactive material it was strontium from disassembled Russian bombs, and it was a very specific half-life of strontium that they needed. Well, as you can imagine, there's only a limited amount of disassembled Russian bombs that had the right half-life for the strontium. So it was not sustainable to continue to make this product as it was designed. So I don't know if this is a good place to stop, Sean, and answer any questions as we move into the commercialization journey. Because this is, so what we've been talking about up to this point is what Mudit showed on his chart. This is where we all know there's layering factors of risk until you get your clinical and your regulatory approval. And then most entrepreneurs think, okay, risk goes away, the market's going to automatically adopt. It's not. This is where it gets even more challenging. You need more time and more money. And we're going to walk you through adjusting, kind of timelines in your head around, okay, what problem am I solving? How long does it typically take to get this type of product commercialized if it's going to be successful? So before we start that, Sean, is this a good time to stop and take questions, or should we keep moving?
Yeah, we can take a look at the questions. Absolutely. Renae, one of the companies I work for has a low risk device that fills an unmet need. I would think we are looking at a high reward solution. How do you see this? Oh.
So that's a good question. There's a number of factors that we would need to take a look at. And actually, that's a great question leading into what I'm about to talk about. Part of it will be your commercialization journey and what that looks like. So let's look at if it's a known problem, in this case that you have, and there's a known solution. So I'm just going to throw this example out there. It's a feeding tube. Everyone knows what feeding tubes are. And maybe you have a feeding tube that is less expensive. Maybe it has some sort of addition to it that ensures that it stays in the stomach and the nutrients are absorbed. I'm just making these things up. But that's a known problem with a known solution. And those products are the quickest to get into the market for a low risk device, depending on where you're at in your development cycle, validation, regulatory clearance. Once that type of product hits the market, if the commercialization is done right, it's usually 1 to 2 years. Now let's talk about, you have a known problem with an unknown solution. So here's where I'm going to talk about a problem that I think pretty much everyone knows we have, and that is there's IV medication errors. So you could ask pretty much any clinician, hey, have you ever seen an IV medication error? They'll say, yes, I have. If you look at the statistics, 50% of all IVs placed have some sort of error. But the problem that we were trying to solve here is that most folks didn't know what the solution was. They've made smart pumps, they've done they've made advancements in many areas, but the most basic area that people actually are found to make the most mistakes in is just knowing what's flowing through the IV line. And so when you have a known problem with an unknown solution, once you press go on the commercialization button, if you do it right, your commercialization journey is usually 3 to 5 years, just to level set expectations for cost, timing. And again, there's no guarantees, but if you do it right and the market adopts, it's 3 to 5 years. What if you have an unknown problem with an unknown solution? This may sound ridiculous at first, but I've worked on a few devices in this area. And in this particular one was for nasogastric tube placement. So most people at the time that I started working in this space didn't realize that 30% of nasogastric tubes intended for the stomach did not land or stay in the stomach, because they didn't see the autopsy reports when people died from misplaced feeding tubes just said that they died from cardiac arrest, their heart stopped. Well, your heart would stop if the nasogastric tube landed in your lungs and you were fed into your lungs. So when you have a product like this, maybe you're a clinician, in this case it was a clinician that saw this unmet need and developed this product, I'm going to take you through that commercialization journey. This was a lower risk device, but it took a really long time to successfully commercialize. So in 2003, both the US and the UK acknowledged that the way we were placing or confirming placement of feeding tubes wasn't working. We were blowing air bubbles in. By 2005, the UK said, stop blowing air bubbles, use pH. By 2015, my client's product was on the market, and we started educating hospitals about these published studies related to nasogastric tube misplacement with auscultation. And by 2018, we were able to change national and global standards to use pH first. And we did launch, and it still is the only US FDA cleared device that uses pH to confirm nasogastric tube placement, but people were still hesitant to adopt. So it took from 2018 to 2021 to really get that market traction. So this device actually started its journey closer to probably 2005 and 2006, and it took till 2021 to really get market traction. And so this is, again, a lower risk device than a class 3, but it has just as long of a commercialization journey. And I think it's really important, if you're looking to invest in these types of technologies, to understand what your commercialization adventure is going to be, so you understand that time value of money. And then this is the final category, and I'm imagining none of you are in this, but if you're an investor, this is one to definitely look out for. It's an unknown problem with a known solution. So what do I mean by that? This is where somebody has a great technology and they just don't know where it fits in the market. So they're trying to find how to adapt it into the market. And this is not something I would recommend investing in. This is the highest risk and will likely go nowhere. Before I talk about how important a team is, any questions?
So there is a question. What are some of the standard ways to answer and validate the questions to ask? So, I mean, in a sense, you've just been going over that.
Yes.
But, if you had to sort of enumerate, like look first at,
I would say, okay, I would literally go back to, and this sounds so basic, and a lot of this stuff is basic, but listen, hey, does the end user really need it? So don't go on an end value of 1. I would talk to, voice of the customer groups, talk to at least 10 people. It doesn't have to be expensive. But if you can get access to 5 to 10 people that you think would use the device, ask them, hey, let me tell you what I'm thinking here. Is this something that would work? You're either going to learn A, it's not going to work. B, it's going to work, but it may need to be adapted differently for the target market. Then also ask yourself, is it appropriate for that market? I did give that example about the one technology for for skin cancer screening worked great in Europe because it helped triage and get people into the dermatologist faster, but wasn't appropriate here. So really do your homework and figure out, is it appropriate for the target market? Hey, can it be made? You know, pressure test that too with the folks that are telling you, hey, we've got this great idea, this great product, you know, walk me through how you're going to make it and how you're going to scale it. Because you want to understand up front if there's any rate limiting factors. I gave you an extreme example of disassembled Russian bombs where they needed the strontium, but there's many other questions and ways that you can ask to understand whether it can be made. And can the end users use it? That's where you talk about, can it fit into clinical workflow? And do they have the right skill set? Again, go to the people who are going to be using that device and ask these questions. This is so key. I see fantastic technologies, great ideas fall apart at the commercialization point because the end users can't use it. It doesn't fit into their workflow. And the workflow here in the US can be very different than the workflow in Europe, Japan, and other markets. So that's where you really have to take the time to understand your target market as well.
I would just like a moment to
Question.
say that if anybody would like a certificate of attendance, to please put their name and email address in the chat, not the QA, in the chat, and we'll make sure that you get that in a few days. Let's see. So yeah, that you brought up a lot of interesting things, and I'm gonna let you continue.
Okay, so the team. Mudit mentioned the team and how important it is for implantable class 3s, and across the board with any med tech investment, the team is critical. The skill set that you typically need when even for a less risk classified device is not necessarily, as you're developing it, the same skill set that you need to commercialize. So I can't tell you how many times, especially at Lean, we work with a lot of clinicians that have excellent ideas. They understand where the unmet needs are in the market. And they themselves are either technical or they hire a technical person or an engineer to help them develop a medical device. And with the right guidance of having folks around you that have done it before, you have a much higher success rate than if you are working as a clinician or if you're investing in a technology that was invented by an engineer, clinician, or a combination of the two that don't have real world med tech experience. There's some yellow and red flags there. So make sure that the team that you're investing in has experience. And then also you can take the time to question expenditures. I'll talk about that here in a minute, and really challenge the experience validation too of the team. Like somebody might say, oh, well, you know, I worked at DuPont. And that's, you know, that's all you know about them. Ask them specifics. Okay, well, how many medical devices have you personally developed? How many have you actually successfully seen commercialized? You want a combination of, you know, as Mudit said, soft skills, people who are good to work with, but also you really need a proven track record. So when is it time to bring in the experts? I know we're kind of running short on time here, but boy, regulatory is huge. This is an area that we can help you with as an investor doing due diligence. There's companies out there, see it all the time, that are making claims that they can't substantiate to the FDA. They're making claims outside of what their clearance is. They're going into unauthorized markets. What does that mean? They've got clearance in the US and they think, oh, well, I've got clearance in the US, I can go to Europe. No, they're missing documentation in their files. Their strategy is misaligned between what they claim their intended use for the devices and what the reimbursement codes are for. And then there's a lot of just unresolved regulatory impacts. So this is a very technical area. Michelle actually does a whole webinar on this, and I suggest you can, you know, look at that on YouTube. And or if you're seriously doing due diligence on a company, we're happy to talk to you about the services we can provide to help identify issues in these areas. And then equally important are quality system red flags. The design may be inadequate because they didn't follow the right design controls. They might, if it's a low risk device, God forbid, I hope this wouldn't be for a higher risk, but they might not have a quality management system. That's not okay. You have to have a quality management system, period. Again, leading back to the team, there could be a lack of understanding of a quality management system, how it works and how it functions. We see that all the time. They either overbuild or underbuild. And then also a lack of quality system maintenance. So they may have put a quality system in place, but they didn't then follow it. And finally, did they decide to use a very expensive electronic quality management system? There's a number of those on the market. We don't usually recommend using one of those till you hit about 20 to 30 employees because they're very expensive and very burdensome if you're a very small team that doesn't need that level of control. So these are all red flags and things that we can help you look for. Of course, don't forget clinical trials. Mudit talked about how important that is for class 3 devices. It can be important depending on your product code and where you fall with the lesser risk devices, but I won't spend too much time on it. And then intellectual property. If you're looking to invest, you really want to know that that IP ownership is solid. You want to know that the company owns it. That's a very basic thing. So make sure the company owns it. Make sure that, for example, the best protection would be you're looking at investing in a product and they have utility patents that sit like an umbrella over the whole concept of what they're protecting. Much stronger than design patents. A combination of utility and design patents are great. Utility covers you, and then design patents kind of fill in the gaps to cover the exact form and features of your design itself. And then, ask yourself, is the product differentiated enough? Reimbursement, know that upfront, whether there's a clear path. If there is, and you can align your regulatory strategy with it, do it. If it's a new technology, there's not a clear path, you need to ask and challenge the group on, okay, how is this device going to be paid for? There's no reimbursement codes. Tell me how it's going to be paid for. And then manufacturing. This is huge, especially if you have a device that, is just not software or AI, and you're working with a company. Maybe it's folks who are new to MedTech. It's a new engineer. It's a new clinician. Ask them for quote comparisons for really expensive devices. I've seen companies pay $5 million for tooling where we then got competitive bids and it was 500,000. Not kidding. That huge of a gap for the same quality. And when you're looking at manufacturers, or you're working with a company, you're looking to invest, challenge them on their manufacturers. Are they FDA registered? Across the board, doesn't matter what kind of device it is. You're selling in the US, it has to be FDA registered. For certain classification devices, they have to be ISO 13485 certified as well. Another big thing here too in your partner selection, a lot of people don't think about this, but they get in big trouble. If you have tooling, make sure that you own it. I can't tell you how many times I've seen clients that come to us that have created very expensive tooling with a contract manufacturer, and they didn't own the tooling. The relationship fell apart with the contract manufacturer, and guess what? They had to go make that huge investment somewhere else to get started over again. So there's a huge risk of outlay of cost and delay of getting your product either to the market or sustaining it in the market. Make sure you own the tooling. I say don't work with the partner who won't let you own it. And then finally, when it comes to target markets, if you're an investor and you're being told that this product is great for the US Department of Defense, ask them where they're manufacturing the product. If you want to sell to the US government, you have to make the product in a free trade country. So if they say, well, we're making it in China, well, China's not a free trade country. So these are the types of questions and the things that you need to be thinking about as an investor going into this space. So I know we have 4 minutes left, and I'm basically at the end of my talk here. Are there any questions?
I would like to encourage everybody to take advantage of the 30-minute free consultation. If you want a regulatory consultation, put regulatory in the chat. If you'd like commercialization, reimbursement, etc., everything that investment that Renae is talking about, put commercial in the chat. Let us know. Someone will reach out to you, help you book the call. You know, we have all these expert webinars and then it's like, oh, huh, thanks, bye. So I would like to encourage you to interact. Renae is very friendly and she would love to talk to you about what you're working on. Don't be shy, people. Right, Renae?
Exactly. Thank you, Sean. Please
Um,
reach out.
Yeah, please reach out. Um, here's a final question for you. How can a company be confident in their Class 1 device designation without a 510K? Is self-classification adequate? Is a pre-sub meeting with FDA better even if the device is 510K exempt? Just to tell them we think it's Class 1, and do you agree?
So that's a very good question. And actually, we have a product for you at leanRAQA that can help you with that. It's called a regulatory pathway assessment. And what we do is we look at all the potential predicate devices that are out there, so devices that might be considered substantially equivalent. And if it looks like your device is a clear fit with something else that's already been cleared and has a product code and fits that regulatory path, you can use that report with investors and say, yes, we're confident. We had a regulatory pathway assessment done, and this is what they said. Now, if we do a regulatory pathway assessment and you don't clearly fit into a product code, there's some questions about whether you might be able to use a lesser product code, not lesser product code, but maybe a class 1 versus class 2 510K exempt versus not. Then we can help you figure that out as well. And we'll then make recommendations that maybe you should do a pre-sub with the FDA. Maybe you should do a 513G. So definitely reach out to us, put time on our calendar. You can just scan that barcode there. And I think it takes you right to our website where there's a link where you can put time on the calendar, or just respond in the chat and just say, hey, I need some regulatory guidance. Take advantage of that 30 free minutes.
Absolutely. I encourage everybody to reach out. Well, Renae, it's 6 p.m. Rome time. And
I wish I could say that.
want to thank you again, and everyone who gave up their time today. This was a fantastic session, I have to say. I think this is going to be really popular when it hits the YouTube and the replay. And thank you for bringing such an excellent guest with you today. The two perspectives together really, solidified my understanding of investing. And yeah, awesome webinar. Thank you.
Thank you, Sean, and thank you everyone for attending.